Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast, where we discuss the world of film from a fresh angle. And now your host, Robert Yanis Jr.
Hey there, Crooked Crew. Rob here. We're going from the weird to the surreal this week as we talk about David Lynch's 2001 classic Mulholland Drive. But before we get to that, you can find more episodes of the Crooked Table Podcast on Apple, Spotify, and other podcatchers, as well as crookedtable.com. As I said, in this episode, we're going to be talking Mulholland Drive with returning guest Albert Lanier. It was a blast to have him come on and talk about this movie that I hadn't seen just because, David Lynch, as I say on the episode, is a lot. Let's listen to a little bit of the trailer for Mulholland Drive, and then we'll jump right into the discussion.
I can't believe it. I'm just so excited to be here. I'm in this dream place.
This one comes highly recommended.
Dream place. What are you doing?
Get out of the car. Yes.
The girl is still missing.
What's wrong?
I just don't know who I am.
I wonder where you were going. Mulholland Drive. Come on, it'll be just like in the movies. We'll pretend to be someone else. Silencio.
This is all an illusion.
You want to know who you are, don't you?
Where's this going?
Mulholland Drive.
It's been a very strange day.
Getting stranger.
Silencio.
On this episode, we're going to be talking about the 2001 film Mulholland Drive, directed by David Lynch. And I'm honored to welcome back to the show, Albert Lanier. Welcome back to the show.
Well, it's nice to be back on Crooked Table. And it's great to come back for a film like this one, especially Mulholland Drive. It's especially fitting considering that it is 2021 and it's basically the 20th anniversary. I think this year is the 20th anniversary of the feature of the film. It was released in 2001. So that's reason why I selected this. It's also one of my favorite David Lynch films. And it has a bit of personal resonance with me because I lived in LA twice.
Okay.
So
okay, and we'll definitely get into that. But before we do, tell the people a little bit about who you are and what you have going on. We haven't spoken since mid 2019, delving into Eyes Wide Shut. So tell people what you've been up to since then and what you have going on now.
Well, since I was on the show to analyze Eyes Wide Shut, of course, what's changed has been sort of the world on one level, coronavirus. But for me, I was already retired when I did the show and I was on the show. But what appears to have changed is that I'm coming out of retirement now as of what's occurring at present. I'm getting ready to start pounding the quote unquote internet pavement, so to speak. And I'm coming out of retirement to freelance once again, maybe to be a journalist. I'm not quite sure, but I'm definitely coming out of retirement to freelance again after about 4 years of retirement, 4 glorious years, but coming out of retirement. And I'm also looking to, if possible, focus on film and television among types of writing I hope to do, if it's feasible. More interviews and analysis if possible. But I'm also currently in the process. I've been writing a blog since I had retired that's on medium.com, and that deals with media and current events. No film and TV there, unfortunately, but So that's what's kept me busy a little in my retirement. But right now, again, I'm slated to get back to freelancing. And I'm also engaged in doing more film analysis like this, more appearances on podcasts and talk shows. So I'm looking to do more of that. Not only that, but also I'm engaged right now and trying to set up bookings on shows to discuss the case of Sam Cooke, the singer-songwriter and producer, who's one of the focal points of the movie One Night in Miami. I believe is directed by, I think it's Regina King, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. And so who I'm sure a number of people who listen to the show may be familiar with, if you know film and TV. So I'm kind of trying to set that up in regards to bookings right now and in terms of shows and discuss that case. I've actually been interviewed in regards to true crime, which wasn't something I was interested in until I was interviewed by a podcast called Parallax Views. I've been on that show for other reasons, but we did a couple of episodes called I think The Dark Side of Hollywood, where I did my analysis of the Bob Crane case, the death of Hogan's Heroes star Bob Crane. He also did some movies, including some for Disney. And also the Robert Blake case, also the death of Bonnie Lee Bakley, who was his wife. So I analyzed those, and I hope to analyze Sam Cooke, especially in regard because there's movie One Night in Miami has come out recently, and I think is drawing some nice critical attention and certainly some interest from the general public watching it at streaming and otherwise. So that's what I'm engaged in right now. But my main focus right now, again, is getting back to analyzing films on podcasts and talk shows and coming out of retirement and freelancing again.
I think the focus on Sam Cooke makes a lot of sense, as you were saying, the timing with the One Night in Miami, and it looks like Leslie Odom Jr., it's a Tony Award winning star of Hamilton and things like that. That it sounds like he's probably going to get an Oscar nomination for his performance. It's looking that way in that film. So I think it's exactly the right time to open that up again. And speaking as a fan of your work and as someone who, I think you really elevated this show when you came on to talk about Eyes Wide Shut. It felt like film school in a way, really? That's a compliment.
Thank you. That's very nice of you. You've been very complimentary, I have to say. I really thank you for the nice things you said about me on Twitter and elsewhere. It's really quite flattering. And, film school, that's interesting. I didn't go to film school. I just went to school. I just graduated from a liberal arts college with a bachelor's degree. So I didn't study film formally. I did take a film course once, but I didn't study it formally. Well,
your level of analysis that you brought to it, I thought was really strong. As someone who hadn't seen Eyes Wide Shut until we did the podcast, same with Mulholland Drive, which we'll get into. I thought you brought a lot of interesting points and a lot of strong interpretations and things like that. So I really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm glad to hear that you're making that part of your focus going forward is trying to.
Right. I hope to write about film again. I haven't written about film in, as some listeners or any who are familiar with me online will know, I was a reviewer for Ain't It Cool News, the film website. And I stopped. I was a reviewer for them, covering film festivals here in Hawaii, mostly from about 2002 until about 2010. So I haven't written about film in over a decade. So hopefully, if everything works out, I'll get to write about film again. And TV, maybe I haven't really done TV, but I'll get to write about film and some other aspects. But that's what I'm hoping, is to get back to, hopefully, to some extent, focusing to a great extent on entertainment, if not share that focus with other aspects.
Right. Absolutely. Or in applying your entertainment knowledge to other elements of the world, or, as you were mentioning film and television, the lines are so blurred now anyway, that I feel like so much, and transitioning to David Lynch now, just like, Twin Peaks, The Return, for example, which I didn't see that because I still haven't caught up with the original series all the way through. that is another example where people were like, no, this feels like a film. It's a TV series, but is it a TV series? So I think that's, he's one of those artists that's really sort of helped perpetuate that blurring the line of where film ends and television begins. I think we're seeing that a lot now this season with the Small Axe series of movies that Steve McQueen directed. So like a lot of people are just trying to differentiate. Well, are those individual films? Is it a mini series? How does that work exactly? So I think this film in particular, Mulholland Drive, is an interesting example of how those different media kind of merge and flow into each other, because as I'm sure you're aware, Albert, like Mulholland Drive was conceived as a television series. Did you want to delve into that a little bit and tell listeners about the first time that you saw this film?
Right. I saw this film in theaters in 2001. And by that time, of course, it was a feature-length film, theatrical release. It had won David Lynch a directing award at the Cannes Film Festival, which I think he shared that year. And what was interesting about Mulholland Drive and looking at its backstory, to use that cinematic term, is that Mulholland Drive started out as an idea that was pitched to ABC Network. And because as you're aware, and I'm sure that people who are David Lynch fans who will no doubt listen to this are aware, Lynch had done Twin Peaks for ABC. He did that show, which in my view was a groundbreaking TV show. Mm. And in 1998, he had pitched the idea for Mulholland Drive to ABC. He got a green light to do a pilot. He shot a pilot. And my understanding, I saw an interview where Lynch himself said that some executive had seen I guess, a tape of the pilot at 6 o'clock in the morning when he was making calls and drinking coffee or whatever, and decided, this is not going to work. Now, here's the interesting thing more recently with this. When I do analyses, I don't go to watch the film again. I rely on the experience I had watching it for the first time in theaters. But I did watch what is supposedly the pilot for the Twin Peaks, not Twin Peaks, but for Mulholland Drive, which is supposedly on YouTube. I just saw it recently. And it's about, I guess, nearly an hour and a half. It's interesting. I won't discuss it. I won't go into detail about it here. It says the unaired Mulholland Drive pilot, which you can find on YouTube. If you're a fan of Mulholland Drive, the film, and a big Lynch admirer, I recommend taking a look at that pilot just to give you a sense of sort of the evolution of this project. And because it might be interesting to you. But I did get to look at the pilot, and I'll leave it at that. I think the pilot was unfairly scrutinized. I'll just say that. Especially from what I hear of this executive at ABC who took a look at it. In any event, Lynch had managed to get, I think, international funding for this Mulholland Drive as a theatrical release, as a film project, as a feature film. It took about, I think, over a year and a half or so from the time they shot it. They managed to, secure the funding, and they managed to, shoot more scenes in to make this sort of rounder, fuller film. And the result is what you can watch on DVD or in streaming or anywhere else you can see Mulholland Drive. So it's interesting. It's a film that started out as a pilot, as a TV project. And it turned into what has become one of the most lauded films, I would argue, of the 21st century. I mean, it's topped the BBC Culture poll of greatest films of the 21st century. And it's on the Sight and Sound magazine film poll, one of the more recent ones. So it's really become one of the more lauded, critically lauded films and lauded films of this sort of young century.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And just for people listening who haven't seen Mulholland Drive, we are going to talk spoilers in this conversation. So definitely see it as blind as you possibly can. And it is streaming on HBO Max. That's how I saw it.
It is right now. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it's on HBO Max right now to streaming. So I think definitely check that out and then come back to the rest of this conversation, because we will be getting into that in depth. But I agree with you. I think it seems like to me that it is generally considered David Lynch's masterpiece. Would you agree with that statement? And where do you think it fits within his filmography, I guess, thematically? Because before this, I saw Eraserhead and I've seen Fire Walk with Me, and I was really intrigued by David Lynch as a filmmaker. And I meant to get to this movie much sooner, but it's one of those that I'm like, oh boy, that seems like a lot. I have to set aside some mental energy, because David Lynch's movies are, notoriously difficult to scrutinize or at least to come to a definitive interpretation of, I guess. Let's put it that way.
Right.
So go ahead. Where do you speak to that?
Well, first of all, what Lynch has said about Mulholland Drive is that he hasn't offered a definitive interpretation of the film.
Right.
He wants the viewer to come to the film with their own interpretation and their own assessment. And so what I'm doing in this episode and in terms of what I will be doing and discussing is my interpretation. So I'm under no illusion that my interpretation is going to be the dominant or the certified or official interpretation for Mulholland Drive. Be nice if it is, but it's not going to, because this film really doesn't speak to that. And Lynch doesn't want that. He wants the viewers to do so. And I approach it from a larger view of film, which is to say that I view film as code and also as hieroglyphics. And so like a code, like a cipher, what the viewer and the reviewer and the critic have to do is decipher the code, decipher the film. Film is largely looked at as a text in film journals and academic books and so forth. But I view film not so much as a text, but as a code, and as a cipher and as hieroglyphics. And so with hieroglyphics, you have to understand what the symbols stand for and what they represent. And that is how you find your way through films. And some films like David Lynch's Mulholland Drive are codes. And you have to break down this code. You have to decipher this code. You have to be able to explicate it for yourselves. You have to make meaning for you and for you, primarily, you, the viewer, you, the participant, you, the individual looking at this film, this feature. And so film as code is how I view sort of cinema primarily, but film in general as code or as hieroglyphics, so to speak, as opposed to text per se, though text is fine.
Right. Well, I mean, in Lynch's filmography, it's if you're coming to a David Lynch movie and you're expecting literalism, you're in the wrong place. Right. I mean, that's what he's known for. That's why his movies are so, brilliant and or frustrating to people, because they like you were saying, exactly. There is, it's all open to interpretation. It's all allegorical or whatever you want to, whatever descriptor you want to throw on it. It's more trying to capture a tone or it's more trying to get a vibe across or a perspective across rather than telling a literal story. Like there's nothing, which we'll get into, I'm sure. So, and I think that to me is why his movies are so interesting, are so absorbing, that because if you're coming to a Lynch movie, having known, seen any of his previous work or knowing anything about his process, every frame has weight. Every frame has suspense. There's like little moments in this movie where, they're focusing on the espresso in that meeting scene with the Hollywood director and the Castigliani brothers, and little details that would otherwise seem pointless in the hands of David Lynch. That everything is measured, everything is there to either add value or to add value in some way or another, like to contribute to something or to I feel like he throws sometimes red herrings in there too, just to make it to make sure that the viewer is engaged the whole way through. Do you see sort of that kind of element to his filmmaking? Because I do think that there's literally so much going on that I feel like sometimes things are in there that have a tangible in his head meaning, and some stuff that's in there to just kind of toy with the dream logic of a lot of his work.
It's interesting you mentioned that. And my take on Lynch in general, in terms of his films, is that one of the things he does is marry a profound sense of mystery at times, but also he builds menace in a way that very few filmmakers do. He utilizes the tools of filmmaking in very sensory and ambiance-driven ways. His use of music, his use of sound, and you marry that with the visual. Sometimes it's counter. Sometimes it is sort of blended. It's fascinating that the way that Lynch works. One of the few films I think that he did that don't have a quote unquote Lynchian vibe is The Straight Story, which he did for, I think it was Walt Disney, which I think is a great film, but it's a rather simple and powerful film. It's very different from his other films, certainly very different from this one.
Right.
But David Lynch, in regards to his oeuvre, into his general mythology, so to speak, to use the term they use in TV, sort of the Lynch canon. I think the Lynch mythology is based to a great extent. Some will argue that it's based on the surface reality and then what lies beneath. That is true to a great extent. But it's the sense of facade and the sense of menace beneath the facade. It's not just surface and what's beneath the surface, but it's the facade, the sense of things that we see, that we can perceive, and then what lies beneath that, the sort of cruel, harsh, ugly, vicious, and horrible aspects of life that lie beneath that. And that's very important for I think, a David Lynch film. I mean, his films are not, strangely enough, although he did The Straight Story, his films are not Disney films.
Yeah.
You're not going to walk out of a David Lynch movie with a smile on your face, unless you are a surrealist.
Right.
Or you really like that kind of movie. Then you'll be happy. But normally you won't. Not in that.
I'm kind of like half in the bag for that. I think that, and then I could see 100% why this, why mainstream audiences generally aren't all about David Lynch, why this was, cost $15 million and made like $7 million domestically, because it is a very specific itch that David Lynch movies scratch, that you have to be someone willing to watch a 2.5 hour movie and be like, wait, what? At the end, and want to engage with it and want to discuss it and want to think about it and want to break it down. If you're, this is not a movie for like Friday night, go on a date and then just be like, all right, that was that was cool, I guess. It's not a Marvel movie. It's not, it's that surreal element. And he drops that right from the beginning. I mean, we start out with the swing dancing music, that sequence at the beginning, and Betty's sort of arrival in Los Angeles. And like you said, that sense of menace where she's like so happy. She's like, wow, I can't believe it. And the music and all of that kind of lulls you in. But if you know what you're getting into with a David Lynch movie, you're already like, uh-oh, what's happening? What is going on? I'm worried for Betty and or the people she's with, because you know that it's a hair away from everything turning on its face.
Right. See, notice that when you look at the very beginning of that film, you notice what Lynch is doing, again, with the tools of the trade.
Right.
You see those dancers, and they're in, I think, a purple background, if I recall correctly. But they're dancing, and you have this very bright background. And then you see Betty, and there is this really, really harsh lighting. She's overlit, right? It's almost like we're trying to see her. It's almost like when you are how do I put it? When you've got something in your eyes, you got liquid in your eyes or something like that, and you're trying to clear it, and you're trying to, the image that you see before you is not quite clear enough. It's still kind of blurry. It's still, especially if there's a lot of lighting, it's like that. So that's interesting about that opening, is we see Betty, we see the people she's, that are the older people that are grouped next to her briefly. And we see the dancers in the back. And the way it's done is so otherworldly. Mm-hmm. It's not represented realistically. I guess I should begin by stating my overall thesis and précis for the film, and then my basic Lynch pin, forgive the expression, of the analysis. Mulholland Drive is essentially female Sunset Boulevard. Mm-hmm. Now, when I say that, I don't mean a female remake of Sunset Boulevard or a reboot or reimagining, but I believe that is Lynch's creating a Sunset Boulevard that is wholly different and with a female protagonist. Now, those that may remember the original Sunset Boulevard know that it starred William Holden and Gloria Swanson, and that William Holden played a screenwriter. So is a male protagonist. Mm-hmm. This is what in Mulholland Drive, we have a female protagonist, really female protagonist, but a female protagonist who is an actress. So we're dealing with the film industry here. We're dealing with Hollywood. There's also I think when you look at the original Sunset Boulevard, Billy Wilder's film, we get a sense of the decay, the rot that exists in regards to the film industry. It's in regards to older stars and older careers and older homes, even individuals. With Mulholland Drive, I think there's also a sense of age to some extent. Not quite the same. It's not quite the same. It's not, you don't get that sense of decades past necessarily. Although you do kind of do when you look at the Paramount Gate. We don't see the Paramount Pictures because it wasn't allowed when Lynch shot it, but we see the Paramount Gate just like it was in Sunset Boulevard, the original movie. Mm. In fact, I think Lynch stated that the car you briefly see when you see the gate, which is where Betty comes up for audition, was a car in Sunset Boulevard. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Phone interruptus.
Yeah, exactly.
Sounds like something out of Mulholland Drive, actually.
Yeah, leave it in the recording.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like,
people will deconstruct this recording.
Trying to call me or Betty. I wonder. Well, in any event, like I said, Sunset Boulevard is, to me, the sort of précis and thesis of this film. However, you can't sum up, and this is what's dangerous. I don't want people to say, oh, well, you think this is just Lynch's version of Sunset Boulevard. No, I think it's his Sunset Boulevard. Mm-hmm. But you can't reduce it to that. So I don't want it to be seen like I'm reducing Mulholland Drive to Sunset Boulevard, because I'm not. But if people need something to hang on as an idea of what I think in a minor way, yes, this is David Lynch's Sunset Boulevard. So I don't know how much trouble I'll get into for saying that, but what the hell? Now, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I have sort of a similar thesis, but I want to hear the rest of yours first, and I'll tell you what having finished this movie less than 24 hours ago, what my sort of interpretation is. But I want to hear the rest of yours first. Right.
Now, getting to my analysis, what my analysis of Mulholland Drive is that when we look at the conventional analyses on YouTube, and there are a lot of analyses on YouTube. I mean, has to be one of the most analyzed films that I've seen on YouTube. Maybe there are others, I'm sure, that have their share, but Mulholland Drive has their share. One of the, I think, analyses that's usually the standard is that the first part of this film is the dream, and the second part is the reality. So the protagonist, whom I'll call Betty/Diane, I also call her Betty, just to make it simple, but Betty/Diane. The protagonist is having a dream in the first part of the film. And thus the second part of the film is her reality, what life is really like for her. My analysis posits that there is a dream at the beginning, but the second part is also a dream. So that there is no real aspect to this movie, that there is no reality, that it is all the dream state, that it is all fantasy in a sense, it is all illusory in a sense, it is all dreamlike. But that cannot be reductionist. In other words, you cannot simply reduce it to dreaming and say, well, it's a dream. You know, what I call the Bobby Ewing thesis, predicated on the TV show Dallas, where they said it was all a dream, a horrible, horrible dream. Yeah. No, it is a dream. But here's the other aspect. Since I believe that it is going from one dream to another dream. The other aspect is what Lynch does in Mulholland Drive that makes this such a great film. What intriguing, as far as I'm concerned, is that Lynch is essentially making a commentary, you could say, not only on the film industry, not only on Los Angeles, but what he's doing is he understands that films are, of course, a process, a creative process, but also a process of actual work, production, putting things together, shooting, editing, so forth. It's a process. But dreams are also an act of creation. So what I believe that Lynch has done in Mulholland Drive is he's essentially understood that the mind in dreams creates films. We know this from filmmakers to get ideas and dreams or what have you. But what I think Lynch is also saying is that what the mind does is when we have dreams, we are creating our own films. We are creating our own cinematic product. That Hollywood, as we see, has been called the dream factory. But the mind is a factory of dreams. It creates dreams. And so we create our own movies. When we dream, we are creating our own movies. We're casting our friends, our relatives, strangers we saw. That is what happens in Mulholland Drive. When you see certain characters, for example, I will cite two scenes that to back up my thesis of this. The first is the infamous diner scene. with the two characters. One of the characters, I believe his name's Ben, states that he's in this diner and he chose to come to Winky's on Sunset Boulevard. He chose to come to Winky's because he had a dream about that place. And in a dream, he was sitting at the table, much like the one he was at there. And the man that he was with was there. In fact, at one point, he got up and walked away and he was closer to the door. He points, "You're over there." And he said, "There's also a man in my dream." I think it's come to be known as the monster, basically this homeless individual. And he could see that individual, he says, through the wall. And in this scene, both of them pay for whatever they've had, come out of the restaurant, go down a flight of stairs and head to the back. And as they approach, this homeless guy covered with dirt from head to toe comes out and scares the man, scares Ben, I believe his name is. Hope I'm getting that right. Scares him so that he faints. Implication is he may be dead, but I believe he just faints. Now, I believe that this sums up my thesis in regards to, and my analysis as regards to Mulholland Drive. That what he's describing is essentially analogous to the filmmaking process. I had a dream. I was in this restaurant. You were there. So shooting in the diner, you're there on location. Casting, you were there, the friend's there. And something happens. There's a story and there's another character within the story. There was an inciting incident that created an act. What he's describing is the marriage between film and dreams. And so I think fundamentally, as I mentioned before, that is what Mulholland Drive fundamentally is about. The marriage between dreams and film and dreams. Just as Hollywood is described as a dream factory, so the mind is a factory of dreams. I believe that is kind of a perfect, because that's analyzed. You go to YouTube and you will see that scene analyzed to death.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you will see that is probably the most analyzed scene. And what's interesting is those characters. I think one of the guys, you see him in another scene that I believe Betty/Diane looks at him. Again, it is the, forgive me for stating this, linchpin of the film. And that's why I believe that the film, again, looking at the structure, going from dream to dream, and that the underlying conceit of the film is the film process married to dreams, and that the film state, the dream state, and the aspect of films, the process of films are married. And that's what makes Mulholland Drive fascinating to me. And I think that is the essential nature of Mulholland Drive. Now, the diner scene is one aspect that I believe confirms this. The other is Club Silencio.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Mine really hinges on that, my sort of thing, but yes.
Right. So Club Silencio, what do we see in Club Silencio when we follow Betty and Rita to this club? We see, I think he's described as magician, but the host says, I hope I'm getting this right, "Hay no banda." There is no band. This is a recording. At some point, he says, this is an illusion. Again, this promotes the central conceit, as I mentioned before, the fusion between the film process and the dream state. Taking these two elements and bringing them, dovetailing together and synthesizing them. What that scene essentially says is that this is all, much like film, it's an illusion. Films are recorded. The emphasis is there's no band. There's no live nature. It's not that there isn't a human nature. There are humans coming out. Guy comes out and plays a trumpet, or should I say mimes a trumpet. But we see He'll extend his arms and he's not playing the trumpet. Woman comes out and sings Roy Orbison's Crying in Spanish, but she's miming because she collapses and the song continues. The nature of film is that film is an illusion. It is recorded, of course, it's filmed, but it is also a phenomena of dreams. Dreams are illusions in our head. Dreams are, again, like films, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you dream, there may be a band in your mind, but there is no band in actuality. It's just in your head. There is no band. This is a recording. So I cite the diner scene and Club Silencio as the two columns to support my thesis and my analysis, or should I say my analysis of the marriage between the filmic process or the film process and the dream state, which I believe is the essential nature of Mulholland Drive. That is what I believe the film is about.
I think we're in the same neighborhood. I think generally. There's a lot to respond to there. So I think the dream and film connection seems pretty apparent to me as well.
Mm-hmm.
I finished the movie last night.
Okay.
And I didn't watch it 6 a.m. like that ABC executive with the pilot. I think Lynch movies I really believe like his movies are best seen late at night, preferably sort of alone, just kind of experienced in a bubble, because they are so all encompassing, because they do require all of your attention and multiple viewings a lot of times, which I have not had the benefit of yet with this film. So it ended. And then I was like, YouTube, help me out here. So I went to YouTube as well. I found a video by a YouTuber called Nerdwriter1 that's talking about how David Lynch manipulates his audience. And it really focused on, and it really focuses on, for those who haven't seen it, it really focuses on how he upends expectations. It really it hinged on the audition scene and how the movie Mulholland Drive leverages that we've been watching movies our whole lives. So he focuses on the Justin Theroux character, sees her across the set, and you're like, oh, is there a romantic connection between Betty and Adam? We sort of infer a lot of things on our own. The audition scene takes place before we see Betty and Rita kind of doing a read through of the script, poking fun at it and all that stuff. And then when it happens in there, even though we know that it is a script in the movie Mulholland Drive, that Betty is auditioning for something, we get wrapped up in that scene when she performs it. And I feel like that scene, the audition scene, as well as the Club Silencio thing, is David Lynch calling his shot. It's him being like, listen, you bought a ticket. You came in to see Mulholland Drive, a film by David Lynch. You know, this is all pretend, but I'm still going to get you in the end. Like you know that you signed up for a movie experience. So clearly this is a recording, like you were just saying. This is about the art and deception of film. The fact that it focuses on a young actress who arrives in Hollywood and lives this whole mystery with her and this amnesiac woman who is later revealed to be her former lover, but then also there's layers to that story as well. I think that the story that is the dream and then the story that is the reality, I agree with you. I think those are layers of dreams. I don't think any of this is real. I think that's the whole point of the audition sequence and the Club Silencio sequence, is to kind of highlight that. I think that the dream is a combination of a flashback of what really went down with Betty and Camilla, as well as sort of combining her resentment towards Camilla. There's a scene where she hires basically like a hitman to go after her and stuff. So there's like a whole thing there. But what really confirmed it for me is that at the very end, she is alone. She's, she's grieving her relationship or whatever, regretful of the action that she took against Camilla in her heartbreak. She is starting to hallucinate. And who does she see? She sees the two elderly people, the elderly couple that brought her to Hollywood in the first place. Mm-hmm. And they appear to her, they like stalk her and lead her, incite her to presumably commit suicide, but in the same position as the dead body that they see earlier in the movie. And rather than that being performed or that scene carrying out with any sense of reality, it's again artifice. What happens when she pulls the gun on herself? Smoke and mirrors. It's all. Right. It's precisely. All. it's precisely. To me.
That's what I thought recently. Right. Absolute smoke, because you see this virtual. I would call it like a reverse fountain of smoke.
Right.
It's almost beautiful the way that the smoke goes up. I mean, I don't know how it was shot, but the way that smoke appears is very potent at the end of Mulholland Drive. Go ahead.
Yeah. So that's, I think this movie is this is probably obviously one of Lynch's most meta movies, but I feel like it's very self-aware and it's a magic trick. He starts out and says, here, Mulholland Drive, blah, 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 tells the story. And then at the end, I believe, it seems to me, to get back to your Sunset Boulevard point, it seems to me that his thesis here is you go to the movies, you see what people want you to see. You see one side of this business, of this industry. This movie almost plays as an allegory about Hollywood stardom, about the reality of Los Angeles, and almost as a cautionary tale, like warning people away. Like, this is the reality of it. Just be aware before you get off a plane, all ready for your big break, that there is a lot more going on here than you're actually seeing. Right. And the final moment of the movie. So like I said, it starts out with him thinking, you're signing up to see this thriller. It's a psychological thriller. And this woman and this, this other woman who's finds her, they meet under mysterious circumstances and she doesn't know who she is. And they have to unravel this mystery. That's the movie you think you're watching. You're really watching something completely different. And the very end of the movie is where they lift the veil and you realize that you've been in Club Silencio, that you aren't watching a movie where these characters go to a club where everything is recorded. You've literally been in Club Silencio. He's pulled one over on you. You thought you were watching one thing and it turned into something else completely. Hence the woman with the blue hair at the very last shot of the movie. So that's sort of it seems like it's an allegory about Hollywood and about sort of the unspoken contract that an audience makes with the filmmaker and him kind of, leveraging that relationship to make his point even more impactfully.
That's not a bad analysis. It's an interesting analysis. I think the idea of magic trick is pretty apt, considering Club Silencio, and it's not a bad take on Mulholland Drive. I will sort of expand a little further in terms of my analysis to note that the first part of the film is a dream that is a desire, a fantasy, personal fantasy. It's the personal fantasy of Hollywood, the personal fantasy of LA. The second dream is the reality of Hollywood, the reality of, in this case, Diane's life, whereas in the previous it was Betty. And so, but they're still both dreams, because in dreams, you can have dreams that are realistic, that are so realistic that when you wake up, you thought you were actually in some form of reality,
right,
and not a dream. I think we've all had those. The first dream in Sunset, I was going to say Sunset Boulevard, but Mulholland Drive, almost fooled myself there. The first dream in Mulholland Drive is a dream of arrival, whereas the second is a dream of rejection. It's a dream of arrival at the beginning and of ambition. And the second is a dream of sort of resignation, residency, and rejection. And so thoughts it is, Mulholland Drive has been described as a fractured narrative. I prefer to see it as two sides of a coin. A coin has two sides. Thus, it's not simply one coin. I think the problem that people have when they analyze this, they assume that it's one kind of coin and then a different kind of coin. And my argument is it's the same coin, but two sides. Just as I said before, it's basically both are dreams, but they're both dreams about Los Angeles, Hollywood, the film industry, all of that, but still the same coin, just two sides. So I think it's misleading. You know, people are entitled to their own analysis, and I can't say that their analysis is wrong or incorrect. In my examination of Mulholland Drive, what I see when I examine the film and I analyze it is that it can't be reality, but the representation of reality. And again, the representation often feels real to us. So when we look at the end, there's enough that we can see to make us see that this is not a dream. I mean, when we look at Diane's apartment and we look at her, Rita, appearing and saying, "You're back." And then eventually we look and it's an image of her looking at her. Again, that emphasizes to us, or really tells us, essentially, if we're paying attention, that this is a dream that we're seeing again, that we're seeing this dream. And that's an interesting scene because the look on Diane's face when she looks at the other Diane, this is weird describing it, but
it is.
That look, again, is what I note about that dream. Being a resident in LA and in Hollywood, being resigned to anonymity or relative anonymity as an actress, being rejected for roles. As Diane notes, she didn't get the role and the lead in the Sylvia North story, which is the film within this film. Or should I say the film within this dream, but I digress.
Well, not only that, she also, part of the dream is for the lead, it's presumably the Sylvia North story is the movie that Adam is directing in the first dream, I guess. It makes sense that if she's resentful that she lost the lead in that movie to Camilla, that she would concoct this whole conspiracy storyline in her dream where the Castigliani brothers and there's, the cowboy and there's all this like, oh no, you have to hire her, even though the other person is better, to justify why she missed out on that opportunity. Right.
Again, it is the power of the mind to create our own movies, which are essentially dreams. Dreams are our own movies, and we cast ourselves as heroes or heroines, and sometimes as villains. We cast other people in different roles. And so that's when I realized just how intriguing and powerful Mulholland Drive was, and how layered to a certain extent it is, and how profoundly revealing and fascinating this movie is. Not because it just uses all the tools of the trade, as I noted before, but because of what it is essentially saying. It's not just simply this dissection of the Hollywood film industry and about being an actress, but it's also much deeper. It is not just about the film factory that is Hollywood, but our own factory of the mind that creates films. And, just as a filmmaker can create films in his head and ideas for films in his head, so actors and actresses create ideas about themselves.
Yeah.
I think that's what's happening here in Mulholland Drive.
It's also, in a way, it's kind of easy to see how this would have worked as a television series, because especially early on, we mentioned the diner scene. There's what's the character's name? There's Joe. There's the scene where he, he shoots somebody and then shoots another woman in the other room. And then, and then like the janitor, he has to take, it becomes like, it almost, there's early on in the film, there are sections where it does feel episodic. It almost feels like it's toying with different genres at times. You have this like a horror movie, then you have like this kind of like black comedy, then it's like it sort of jumps around a little. So it's easy to see how Lynch might have had this feel initially like the most random television series of all time, and then kind of thread it all together with the reveal in the last chunk of it.
You made an interesting point there. The feel of some of these scenes are like different films. Mm-hmm. Again, going back to my analysis of the film, what you're seeing are the creation of different films within this film, right? Different dreams, different aspects of the dream, I should say, are like different films. The assassin, the hitman, is basically engaged in this sort of, it's almost not quite slapstick, but it's almost sort of a dark comedy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when I saw the movie like nearly 20 years ago, I remember that the people in the audience were howling at that scene, or some were howling at that scene. They were just laughing their asses off. It was, I think, unexpected. I don't think anyone thought they'd see anything like that in a David Lynch film, or didn't expect it. It's a film that never, over the years that I've seen it, it never loses a step. It just never does. I don't think I've ever been bored looking at it. And I've seen it, I don't know how many times, maybe 3 to 5 times, maybe over the years. And it's always intriguing, always fascinating, always riveting, always riveting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think some of the sequences like that where it is designed in a way, like you were saying, to be comedic, to sort of lull the audience into, hey, you're watching a movie. You know how these kinds of things only happen in a movie? I think that only underscores the reveal itself at the last moment that the theater you're sitting in is Club Silencio. Silence your cell phones, they say right before the movie starts, right? So I think that that kind of serves that purpose as well. In addition to just, keeping the audience engaged in this compelling sort of multi-layered narrative. But I liked also the thing we mentioned earlier about the transition from the first dream to the second dream. I mean, she literally opens the blue box and then we enter the box, the camera goes right into it. So we were literally falling down, another rabbit hole essentially. Right. So I think visually he also makes that pretty apparent as well.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting. And this gets into sort of a second analysis of mine of the film, which is a more personal one. When I saw the film in 2001, I was giving my age away, but I was 31 and I was a journalist and I was a writer. And over the years since, I wound up rather unexpectedly becoming an actor on the side, which I never really expected to do. Mm-hmm. So I had stopped, as I mentioned, I was writing as a film critic and reviewer, and I covered film festivals in Hawaii for years, for 15 years or whatever it was. And I had written for Ain't It Cool News as a reviewer from 2002 to 2010. And I started acting as a local actor in Hawaii in 2010. And basically at this point, stopped primarily because of COVID. So I've done short films, and I've done indie films, and I've done theater. So what I find when I see Mulholland Drive now is a personal analysis as an actor, because as I mentioned before, the protagonist, as we all know, is an actress. Mm-hmm. Betty's an actress. Unlike in 2001, when I wasn't an actor, as somebody who has been an actor and who's done tiny little films, student films and indie films, I know what it's like to be in front of a camera, and I know what it's like to play a part. And so I now look at Mulholland Drive with a very different point of view, and that is an actor's point of view, or somebody who's been in some minor part of the industry or some aspect, mostly tiny. I did live in LA twice, once in 1996 and the other time in 2008. I was never an actor in LA. So it's odd. I've been an actor, but somewhere else. And I lived in LA twice, but I was never an actor in LA. I was a writer in LA. It's very interesting. I can now bring that perspective, which I never had. I don't like being the personal. I mean, part of looking at a film for any individual is bringing the personal with you.
100%. Yeah.
I don't like, as a reviewer years ago, I never tried to do that. But now I find, other than some aspect of life that you have an understanding of that's in the film. But now with Mulholland Drive, I find I can't view the film just from a remove. I have to view it as an actor, albeit not someone who worked in LA as an actor. So my personal analysis is of the industry and of aspects of the industry. It's intriguing to me when I look at this film. It's interesting. It's fascinating to me on another level. The audition scene. I saw that scene recently, and I've been like any other actor. When you saw the scene with Betty and Rita going over the script, I've done that. I've done that with other actors. I don't know if I've done that with other people, but I certainly have done that with other actors. When I saw the audition scene and I saw all the people in, you're looking at the producer, you're looking at the actor that Betty's doing the scene with. You're looking at the director, Bob Brooker, who's sort of an absent-minded hack. You're looking at agent and her assistant. You're looking at all these people. What it reminded me of was a student film I had done where I was playing a headmaster, I think, at a school. And we shot it at I think it was some kind of center across from the University of Hawaii. So we were in one of these houses. We were in an office, and I'm sitting behind an office. And there must have been like 20 or 30 people in that room. So you're talking about somebody director's at a table looking at a monitor. You've got a cameraman. You've got other people you got a guy with a, holding a mic. You've had other people. So you got a crowded room of people while I'm talking to two actresses. I think it was an older woman and then it was a younger woman because she was playing the mother and she was a student. So I'm a headmaster at school. And so when I saw that scene with the audition, the crowdedness of it brought back memories to me as an actor. And so there was a resonance there. I mean, it's interesting that how cramped that room is. Mm-hmm. Most people would look at that and they would go, maybe they wouldn't think much of it, but most people would go, would they really hold an audition like that? And, kind of a office that's that crowded.
With like 10 people in a little room. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you don't see that when you look at auditions. Most times you see auditions in movies, even. Somebody's behind a desk, you're in front, the actor's in front of them. And, it's a big enough room. it's like a conference room or some kind of, or a bigger office. But that's like a tiny little office, and you see those people crowded around. It brought back memories to me as an actor. And what I saw was how Betty's able to create this powerful performance. And it just brought back what actors go through. All the conditions and all the aspects of the day. You know, it's clear when Betty's doing the scene with this guy, I don't think she particularly likes this actor,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the guy who's played by Chad Everett. And you could kind of tell this was kind of pitched as a TV pilot and done as a TV pilot, because you have Chad Everett there, who used to be on Medical Center. And you had, I think his name, James Karen, as the producer. He was in the pilot of the TV show Moonlighting. So I'm looking at that scene, and it brought back memories to me as an actor. And so I think the other aspect for me, looking at Mulholland Drive, is looking at it from an actor's point of view, which I don't want to bring to it, but I don't really have much of a choice. Mm-hmm. And to see the personal aspect in regards to the industry. Again, I never worked in LA, and I was a local theater actor. I was doing little films and aspects, but you have an understanding of what it's like to be in that mind, and to be in that headspace, to be in some of those conditions or type conditions. And I think one of the aspects that I think Mulholland Drive drives home is the sort of difficult nature of the industry, not just for women, not just for actresses, but I think in general. I mean, when you looked at the Adam Kesher character, you have, you know, his kind of thread there in the film where he's meeting with the Castiglione brothers, and they want him to cast Camilla Rhodes. And of course, there is the now famous phrase, "This is the girl."
Mm-hmm.
And there's another aspect of the industry. You know, David Lynch has said in interviews that when you don't have final cut, you really don't have control over a movie. You know, and I guess Lynch had suffered that on the shooting of the production of Dune. He didn't have final cut over that movie. And so there's a loss of control. And so that's another aspect of the industry. It's with this Adam Kesher character, is the loss of personal autonomy over a film. Another aspect of the industry. For someone like Betty, we see in the first dream, she starts out all bushy-tailed and bright-eyed and smiling and happy-go-lucky and pleasant. And when we see Diane in the latter dream, she's in this dingy house pouring coffee for herself and pleasuring herself.
And not even enjoying it too. That's the other thing. Like Naomi, like there's like, so it's completely devoid of joy or any kind of positivity or emotion. And I read something that Naomi Watts said that was such a difficult sequence to shoot for, you know, obvious reasons, but that David Lynch, like I think had some kind of a tent or something over her so she wouldn't necessarily have to be exposed to the entire, you know, crew when they were shooting that. But yeah, it's just in a real depressive state, I think, in that.
Right. And it seeps through. And so we see, especially when she, much like echoing some of the opening scenes in the film with the limousine that comes up the drive and then stops. But that limousine at the beginning had Rita in it. So we see the limousine in the second dream with Diane, who was Betty, in it. People are going to be confused hearing this, but when you watch the movie, maybe you'll understand.
To some degree, yes.
Yeah. I have to say it this way, but Diane, who was Betty, is now in the second dream in this limousine. And much like Rita in the first dream, she states, what are you doing? We don't stop here. But this time she's taken up by Camilla, who was Rita in the first dream, and brought up via a shortcut to this house where there's a party. And in the party, Diane states she wanted the lead in Sylvia North, and she went up for it, but didn't get it. And so there is that palpable sense of frustration. And again, as I mentioned before, within that dream, the sense of resignation and maybe to some extent alienation, but also obvious rejection, because actors go through rejection. And you don't get a part, you don't get a part. And that's another aspect, is the sense of rejection, the sense of not getting what you wanted, not being able to be and play who you wanted. That I've seen with actors myself. Right. As an actor, actors have different ways of dealing with it. For me, I was never a full-time actor. I never wanted to be a full-time actor. I never wanted to be an actor. But I was never a full-time actor. I was, up until about 2017, a professional freelance journalist and writer. So I had a career already, and a career I was focused on. So it was a lot easier, I think, for me as an actor, because I didn't have what that character, Diane, wants. Right. That level of success. Success didn't matter to me. If I get a part, great. If I don't, I don't. At some point, though, I think you get tired. And you see that also with, I think, the Diane character in the second dream. Fatigue. A sense of, when I mentioned before, when she looks and says, "You're back," and sees Camilla / Rita, and then looks again and sees herself. The look that her doppelganger, her sort of dream within a dream doppelganger gives her, is that sense of reality, of being realistic. It's a sort of disgusted, like, you need to grow up. You need to move on.
I think that's also the scene where there's the visual cue of the ashtray that the neighbor came by and took, and then it kind of reappears right when Camilla / Rita shows up. But there's another thing that I think, everything that you're saying with how this movie captures the sort of frustration and pressure of being a performer. I think that's a sort of subgenre of movies that's really gained a lot of traction in Hollywood in the last decade or so, specifically with the doppelganger thing. I'm thinking of something like Black Swan, which is very much like the pressure that character is under, the competition that she hallucinates this whole sex sequence with her, and then fantasizes about, that she murdered her, but it's really herself. And it's a whole self-loathing cycle, things like Birdman or The Wrestler. Like a lot of these movies and filmmakers have really delved into the toll that takes on creative people or performers of many different kinds. And I think that's this movie, definitely captures that as well. And perhaps was influential in some of these other movies more recently that I mentioned, kind of starting that new next wave of sort of meta commentary on performances.
Right. That's an interesting point. As somebody who's done local theater, I find Birdman fascinating. I hate to make an aside, but I make it fascinating as somebody who has done theater. I completely understand it as a local theater actor, though I've never been on Broadway. But, they're just aspects of this business that are seen in movies that unless you're an actor in any way, shape, or form, you really just don't. The average person can't understand. I never thought I'd say this as somebody who used to review movies and be at film festivals and meet actors and meet directors and meet producers. But it's true. You really don't understand aspects of this business until you're in the business. Then you get it. I didn't want to get it. I had no interest in getting it, but I found myself an actor, and I now can't. That's why I don't review films anymore, because I can't. I don't have the detachment. I can't look at a film the same way or TV the same way that I did before, because it's different. I mean, I know what it's like to get in front of that camera and have to do this take and go to that take and that take in regards to coverage and get it, because, you know, they got to get the shot and they need to move on to the next shot. And so it's a very different animal. It's a very different world. And you can see it. I mean, I think one of the things Mulholland Drive has been cited as in terms of analysis is how Hollywood treats actresses. I think that's accurate to a certain extent. But this is why I brought up the Adam Kesher character, because I don't think it's just about how Hollywood treats actresses, but I think it's just how Hollywood also treats filmmakers.
Yeah.
And that's why that character is there, and that's why that character is important. And he's played by Justin Theroux, who has this sort of nerdy, this kind of skinny, geeky, nerdy kind of persona. I mean, that kind of optic, that kind of aesthetic. So when we look at his thread and his part of the story, it's interesting.
Obviously, we've been talking about David Lynch because he's the driving force of any movie he makes. And he was Oscar nominated for Best Director for this, which is shockingly the only nomination this movie received. But I mean, maybe not shockingly, considering how kind of bizarre in some ways it is. And that's not normally the Academy's thing. But I also found a little ironic that Betty, Naomi Watts' character, for the first Dream at least, that she has this whole scene about, you know, I'd rather be known as a great actress versus a movie star, considering that I feel like Naomi Watts has fallen into that place. I mean, she's one of the classic actresses in Hollywood that got so close to being like the next big thing and then kind of fell back into doing smaller movies again. A year after this, she had, you know, she was in The Ring, her big like Hollywood breakthrough, and then King Kong a few years later, again playing an actress, and then has been doing, you know, smaller movies in the last few years, The Impossible, for example, things like that. But it's generally, actually, she's in Birdman. That's true. I forgot that. She's also, you know, one of those people that like film critics and movie lovers really are drawn to because she makes interesting choices, but she's never achieved the air quote movie star status, I would say.
That's an interesting point. I don't know. I mean, I think that Naomi has stated in interviews that she was kind of auditioning and I guess getting roles for at least a decade, you know, and it was frustrating. And when she got called up to see Lynch for this film, you know, she got a chance to, I think, to meet him and I think to have a connection. And I could understand that as somebody who's gone auditions. Certainly I never auditioned in LA and certainly never was a full-time professional in LA, but I certainly know what it's like to do auditions. And I certainly know what it's like to go through that process. And I think after a while, it just gets exhausting and it gets tiring. Mm-hmm. And for me, I think I was just tired, even though being in a place here like Hawaii, you just don't have lots and lots of auditions for parts because you're auditioning for these indie films and these student films. And, you know, the actor's lot in a place like Hawaii, which is odd to talk about here, But the reality is, when you talk about a major Hollywood movie that comes to a place like Hawaii, they're not going to hire local actors to go and take even major supporting roles for the most part. You know, they're going to hire people from LA or New York or elsewhere. And so, and I've seen that with some actors that, you know, the kind of frustration and not being able to get work and the way that the system is kind of set up here. And so when I see a movie like Mulholland Drive, I get that about Diane / Betty, but mostly Diane. I understand that. It was never my life because I couldn't focus on it. I was kind of in a weird place because I'm this writer who's acting on the side.
Right.
And, you know, doing films and doing theater eventually. And for me, it was, oh, can I just get, I just wanted to be a supporting actor. I just wanted to be a character actor. I never wanted to be a lead in anything. Get something where I have maybe a couple pages of lines and I'm fine, you know. But you don't see that with that character of Diane. She clearly wanted to be a star and she didn't become one. And that's endemic in terms of LA. I remember when I first lived in LA in 96, I was walking down Hollywood Boulevard and they had these Polaroid photos of celebrities, some display window of some store or whatever it was. And I remember thinking, what happens to the people who don't become celebrities, who don't become famous actors, who don't become stars, successful? You don't see their photos. Now, of course, this was before the internet.
Yeah.
Just before the internet really sort of became the internet. It kind of made me think in that instance, you know, being in a place like LA, what happens? I think when you look at something like Mulholland Drive, you kind of see, even though it's still in my analysis, my other analysis, the dream state merged with the filmic process. Even though it's still dream state, there's still a representation of reality there. There's a sense of the real. There's a sense of actuality. It's sobering what happens. I think in any industry, but more so this one, it just seems sadder in the film business because it can be sadder. There's a lot more at stake. But you could argue that about any industry. You know, there's some people who don't become successful at, you know, being lawyers or being doctors or.
But it hurts more with the entertainment industry because kind of getting
the harsher industry.
Well, because the whole industry is centered on artifice, on dreams, on, you know, this romantic vision of what it could be. And it's not that as this movie gets to. I feel like one of the big points he's trying to make is that, you know, this is what you want, but just be ready that for the reality will kick in. You'll slip down that little blue box and you'll see how dark Hollywood and you know, the movie industry can really get.
You have the two dream states there, the two dreams. Mm-hmm. And so you go from illusion to disillusion.
Yeah.
From fantasy to represent a reality, but it's primarily illusion to disillusion. So what we see in the second dream is disillusion. But again, my central conceit and my analysis is that it's also a dream. But you go from I don't know if you could say that the first dream is a happy dream, that it's a buoyant dream. But the second dream is certainly a nightmare.
Right.
It's not an outright nightmare. The first dream is also not an entirely happy one because there's a lot of dark elements there too. A lot of disturbing elements. A lot of really underlying malevolent elements.
But there's also elements of Betty and Rita sort of sleuthing, like sorting out this mystery and falling in love in the process. You know, it's a very Hollywoodized, you know, narrative, I guess.
Right. Well, you know, the mystery thing is part of the construction, because again, it was built on this pilot.
Right.
So without giving away too much, I mean, the mystery element was the central conceit of the pilot. What we have again is we have that dream and we have the other dream. And they're, again, going from illusion to disillusion, going from fantasy to representation of fantasy to representation of reality. And it's quite... And I see it as this kind of traveling between from one dream to another. I guess you could say back again, not quite back again, but it's from one dream to another. But the industry aspect of it, to me, is a kind of melancholy one, especially in the second dream. But both of them, that's why I say there are two aspects. Some people like to say, and it's not unfair to say it, that it's about actresses, but I would argue it's about filmmakers and actresses, because the Adam Kesher character is important because of what he loses also. He sees his wife cheating, goes home and sees his wife cheating on him with the pool guy, cliche of LA and Hollywood. And he winds up in a cheap motel and he's told they've cut off your credit card, you're out of money. It's the nature of that town and that industry and what it can and will do to people unless people bend the knee and bend to their will. And that's what the Kesher character is forced to do. That's why it's always, you see the dual aspect in this film. You see the two dreams, you see the two characters, Betty and Diane, you see Rita and Camilla, and you also see what happens to the Diane character and what also happens to the Adam Kesher character. And that's not often remarked. Again, dualities. It's different aspects happening. The difference is between, let's just say, Diane and between the Adam Kesher character is that Adam actually at least vents his frustration. You know, he goes and smashes the hood of the car, the hood of the limousine. And he does stand up and say, this isn't right. I don't want this actress for the part of the film. He at least is active. He at least makes a stand. He has to give up his stand or else lose everything, basically. During the meeting, of course, one of the Castiglione brothers tells him, this isn't your film anymore. And so, in a sense, you know, when I, you know, that term, I've seen a video on YouTube under the title, This is the Girl, which is interesting, in analyzing this film. If I were sort of doing a version of Mulholland Drive, I would call it, This Isn't the Girl. Because if you look at that second dream, we see that is what happens, Diane. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Unlike Miller Rhodes, this blonde who ends up, I guess, ostensibly being cast in the Sylvia North story. And Rita, who becomes Camilla in the second dream, who's also cast in the Sylvia North story. We see that Diane is left with a smaller role and she's not getting the role she wants. And she also doesn't get stardom. She also doesn't get the roles that she wishes for. Except, unlike Adam Kesher, she hasn't made a stand. There's nothing she's been able to do that we can see other than kind of spiral and self-destruction. That's sort of the industry aspect of it too, what this industry does to people and what it can do to people. In the case of Adam Kesher, it forces them to make the decisions it wants. If the powers that be want you to cast that girl, you'll cast that girl, or that film isn't yours anymore. Won't get final cut. Your decision making will be absolute nil. That's where the cowboy comes in, right? He's that representation of in a sense, if you want to use symbols, he's a representation of Hollywood. Cowboys are part of the sort of filmic canon of sorts, the mythology of Hollywood. And I believe it was the producer, the guy who played the part of the cowboy was a producer, I believe. And he wore, I think the outfit that he had on was supposedly from Tom Mix, who was one of the first cowboy stars in Hollywood, in American films. Like I said, that's why I think when you look at this film, in terms of the analysis of that what I'm on right now, the analysis of the industry, I see it again as representing when we look at what the industry does and what it can do. That's why I contrast and I look at both Diane, who was Betty, and Adam Kesher, who is still Adam Kesher. And I look at them again as part of the dualities in the film, not duality in the film, but dualities in the film. And so I contrast them both together because people kind of sometimes lose sight of that. They kind of wonder, his part, his character is just a means to an end. But I would argue his character is part of the toll, the cost exacted on talent in Hollywood. In his case, above the line directorial talent, filmmaking talent. In the case of Diane, it's acting talent, performance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Adam's storyline it contributes greatly to both what Lynch is trying to say, what the movie's trying to say, as well as we sort of said earlier, Diane's dream of how she lost the role and how the industry squeezed her out. Like, I think it works. It fulfills both realities of the film that we're watching, as well as the film, I guess, that Diane is making in her head about her experience in Hollywood and her sort of downward spiral. It's an interesting one. I'm glad I finally watched it. I kind of want to see it again or do a deep dive into some more YouTube stuff. Cause I'd like to, this is the kind of movie that it's, especially since Lynch hasn't really confirmed anything, which, is I think the way this movie should be experienced anyway, but it makes fun to just hear different perspectives and see what other people come up with and what they think, the Blue Key or the Silencio Theater, what they think all that means. Obviously we could talk about this forever, but is there, go ahead.
I will briefly state, just to touch on a couple of the symbolic and literal aspects in the film, that I see the box, that blue box that opens up, as a sort of Pandora's box, right? It's also a linkage. It helps move us from one dream to the other. Yep. And the use of blue also in the film, right? It's bathed in blue at times. Blue is an important color. The woman's hair at the end is blue. I was just about to say the key is blue. That the hitman gives Diane / Betty is blue. And of course, we know in Hollywood, and we know blue in a sense is funk. It's depression. It's also what porn movies are called sometimes, or what used to be called. They're called blue movie. Blue is an interesting color as used in this film, in that, and also the blue box and the use of the key. So I just wanted to touch on a couple of those. Yeah, no, for sure. I think that does that. That's pretty much all we're going to say about Mulholland Drive in this episode. Yeah. So Albert Lanier, can you tell people where they can find you on social media? You can find me on Twitter at Critic Incorporated. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on LinkedIn, I guess. I guess I can note one of my emails. I'll take a chance and note one of my emails. if you want to reach me, you can reach me at mediawriter1@yahoo.com. That's mediawriter, the number 1 at yahoo.com.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely people reach out and get Albert on your podcast to talk about film and television. Thank you so much for coming back and bringing Mulholland Drive to the table. Finally gave me a reason to go back and do that. I've said this before on other episodes of the podcast, possibly even on your last episode, but it's just like it's nice to have this show as a motivation to go back and finally catch up with some of these like acclaimed movies. And this was a really interesting one. And I want to go back and watch more of David Lynch, because he hasn't even really made that many movies. And every one of them that I've seen has been really fascinating. So I think that people who haven't seen this should definitely check it out. We spoiled a lot for you, kind of.
But it's not really spoiling, because
I was going to say, can you spoil it? That's a good question.
You can.
Yeah, it's an experience. It's like, You can't say, I went on this roller coaster. I'm like, yeah, okay. I'm sorry to spoil it for you. It goes down. It's a big drop at the end. I'm like, well, that's not exactly the same as going on it. Because it is one of those, it is really an experience in that way.
Right.
But I'm glad that, we just got a chance to talk about it, and we will definitely bring you on again at some point to talk about something else, another deep dive into one of these sort of dreamlike auteur cinematic works. I feel like Eyes Wide Shut and Mulholland Drive have certain similarities in that regard as well. So we'll have to keep that theme going, perhaps. That's all we have for this week. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Albert Lanier about David Lynch's 2001 psychological thriller, Mulholland Drive. Once again, I want to thank Albert for coming on and bringing Mulholland Drive to the table. If you can give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts for the show, we'd love to hear some feedback on what you think of these episodes going forward. Again, as I mentioned last week, we're sort of tweaking the premise of the show a little bit more, focusing more on movies that are somewhat off the beaten path. This week was a little bit of an exception, since it is roundly considered by cinephiles and critics one of the most acclaimed movies of the last couple of decades. But I still feel like the average moviegoer probably hasn't caught up with Mulholland Drive. Again, it was made, I think, $6 million at the box office, so it was not a huge blockbuster hit or anything, but definitely one worth checking out. It's now streaming on HBO Max as of this recording. So that's all we have for this week. We'll be back with another episode next time. Until then, keep it crooked.
This has been a production of crookedtable.com. All rights reserved.
CROOKED.